Hi, good evening all of you and welcome to a new episode of Arguably the Reading Quest. Have you ever thought of a mathematician who wrote volumes of books on philosophy and has been awarded a Nobel Prize in Literature for the book for which he was expelled from Trinity College, Cambridge? Yes, we are talking of none other than Bertrand Russell. He is one of those geniuses who can be read alike by the enthusiasts, by the well-reads, by the novice, alike. So if you want to embark upon a journey of lifelong passion for reading and language, Russell is one writer that I will definitely recommend. I would also recommend Russell in order how to engage with ideas and how to critically examine ideas. I would also recommend Russell in order to how think beyond the obvious. What is the frame of reference through which you can think? I would also recommend Russell not in order to how a language should be written, rather how we can argue and how critical reasoning and critical thinking is not something that is alien to language, rather it is a part and parcel of language. Rather there is a reverse causation between language and logic, which means the better your logic is, the better you will be at language, and the better you will be at language, the better will your logic be. Which means how to demolish an idea, how to demolish an argument, how to frame an argument, how to strengthen an argument, how to weaken an argument, how to see if there is a paradox, how to see if there is a logical fallacy, and how the logical fallacy can be tackled. If all of these things interest you, I think Russell is your go-to thinker. So Russell was a British mathematician, a British philosopher, a logician, an essayist, and a social critic best known for his work in mathematical logic and analytical philosophy. So his most influential contribution includes his championing of logicism. Logicism means in some way mathematics is reducible to logic. His defense of neutral monism, the view that the world consists of just one type of substance which is neither exclusively mental nor exclusively physical, and his theories of definite descriptions, logical atomism and logical types. So mind it, this video is just to give you a brief overview of Russell's popular work and not his technical work. So in this book I will quote Russell's from various books of his, and then I'll suggest you what are the books to be read in order to develop some interest in language and philosophy in particular, minus his non-technical works, not his mathematical logic and all that. Okay, so these days there's a clamor to pass a judgment on history and how history should be written. Should it be this or should it be that way? Should it be leftist leaning? Should it be rightist leaning history? But what Russell says about history, that history should be taught as the history of the rise of civilization and not as the history of this nation or that. It should be taught from the point of view of mankind as a whole and not with undue emphasis upon one's own country. Children should learn that every country has committed crimes and that most crimes were blunders. They should learn how mass hysteria can drive a whole nation into folly and into persecution of the few who are not swept away by the prevailing madness. You see, it still resonates today. They should be shown movies of foreign countries in which children, though aliens, would be enjoying much the same pleasure and suffering much the same sorrows as those enjoyed and suffered by children at home. So this is taken from an essay, What is Democracy?, revised and reprinted in his book, Facts and Fiction. So this book can be read. Now Russell says that the history of war should be a small part of what is taught. Much the more important part should be concerned with the progress in the arts of civilization. War should be treated as murder is treated. No wonder he was a pacifist. And he vociferously and voraciously campaigned against World War II, which cost him his job as well. It should be treated, it should be regarded with equal horror and with equal aversion. It will be said that the boys under such regimen will be soft and effeminate. It will be said that they will lose the manly virtues and will be destitute of courage. And all this will be said by Christians in spite of Christ's teaching. You see, there's an element of, atheism as well. So this has been taken from the Autobiography of Russell. So Autobiography of Russell can be read. I would not recommend to read it from A to Z, but you can dabble with his autobiography and read the chapters that appear interesting to you. In his autobiography, again in the same book, Russell writes, "To care for what is novel, for what is beautiful, for what is gentle, to allow moments of insight to give wisdom at more mundane times, to see in imagination the society that is to be created where individuals grow freely, and where hate and greed and envy die because there is nothing to nourish them. These things I believe, and the world, for all its horror, has left me unshaken." Now, Russell also was very much a friend of Einstein, and they exchanged correspondences while Einstein fled the Nazi persecution, and he was teaching at Princeton University, where Russell was teaching at Trinity College, Cambridge. So Russell writes in his essay, "The Will to Doubt," in Free Thought and Official Propaganda, that what would have happened if Einstein had advanced something equally new in the sphere of religion or politics, as he did in the theory of relativity in science. English people would have found elements of Prussianism in his theory. Anti-Semites would have regarded it as a Zionist plot. Nationalists in all countries would have found it tainted with lily-livered pacifism and proclaimed it a mere dodge for escaping military service. All the old-fashioned professors would have approached Scotland Yard to get the importation of his writings prohibited. Teachers favorable to him would have been dismissed. He, meantime, would have captured the government of some backward country where it would have become illegal to teach anything except his doctrine, which would have grown into a mysterious dogma not understood by anybody. Ultimately, the truth or the falsehood of his doctrine would be decided on the battlefield without the collection of a fresh evidence for or against it. So this is what Russell writes in favor of a brilliant example of scientific temper of mind in the theory of relativity and its reception by the world. Russell was a vociferous writer on religion. Russell praised and critiqued Buddhism. So Russell says, "Among present-day religions, Buddhism is best. The doctrines of Buddhism are profound, they are almost reasonable, and historically they have been the least harmful and the least cruel. But I cannot say that Buddhism is positively good. Nor would I wish to have it spread all over the world and believed by everyone. This is because Buddhism only focuses on the question of what man is and not on what the universe is like. Buddhism does not really pursue the truth. It appeals to sentiments and ultimately tries to persuade people to believe in doctrines which are based on subjective assumptions, not objective evidence." So you can read Russell on Religion, is a book published at Routledge, okay? And it includes why I am not a Christian and has religion contributed anything useful to the civilization, and reason it out for yourselves. Russell also critiqued Karl Marx from Why I Am Not a Communist. And he says that my objection to Marx are of two sorts. One, that he was muddle-headed, and other, that his thinking was almost entirely inspired by hatred, poverty and strife. I have always disagreed with Marx, but my objection to modern communism goes deeper than my objection to Karl Marx. It is the abandonment of democracy that I find particularly disastrous. A minority resting its power upon the activities of secret police is bound to be cruel, oppressive and obscurantinist. His belief that there is a cosmic force called dialectical materialism which governs human history independently of human volitions is a mere mythology. His theoretical errors, however, would not have mattered so much but for the fact that his chief desire was to see his enemies punished, and he cared little for what happened to his friends in the process. Marx's doctrine was bad enough, but the development which it underwent under Lenin and Stalin made it much worse, says Russell in Why I Am Not a Communist. So I hope with the help of these quotes, you are gaining an idea that what exactly to expect and why to read Russell. You see the high quality of argument that Russell put forth. Russell also claims Gandhi's non-violence civil disobedience work, but it is conditional. Here what Russell says, again from the Autobiography of Russell, from chapter 12, and I quote, Mahatma Gandhi was unquestionably a great man. And remember, Gandhi was protesting against the British colonialism, the British Empire, where Russell was a Britisher. So it requires a man of real compassion and pacifism to praise someone who is voicing opinion against your own country, the country you are born and brought up in. Somehow Charles Dickens failed to do that, but Russell did. Russell was a genius. Mahatma Gandhi was unquestionably a great man, both in personal force and in political effect. Non-violent resistance certainly has an important sphere. As against the British in India, Gandhi led it to triumph. But it depends upon the existence of certain virtues in those against whom it is employed. When Indians lay down on railways and challenge the authorities, the British authorities of course, to crush them on the trains, the British found such cruelty intolerable. But the Nazis has no scruple in analogous situation. The doctrine which Tolstoy preached with great persuasive force, that the holders of power could be morally regenerated if met by non-resistance, was obviously untrue in Germany after 1933. Clearly Tolstoy was right only when the holders of power were not ruthless beyond a point, and clearly the Nazis went beyond that point. Now, one of his iconic work that requires special mention is The History of Western Philosophy, a magisterial look at the history of his own subject by an iconic philosopher, one of the brilliant minds of 20th century. So in History of Western Philosophy, Russell asks that who is one of the most important intellect that ever lived? I insist that you pause the video here for a while and think about it, that who is the most important intellects that has ever lived? Russell claims ancient Greek philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras, intellectually one of the most important men that ever lived. Without Pythagoras, Russell submits, there would be no mathematization of science, no Platonism, and consequently no Christian and Islamic theology. It is only in quite recent times that it has been possible to say clearly where Pythagoras was wrong. I do not know of any other man who has been influential as he was in the sphere of thoughts. I say this because what appears as Platonism, when analyzed, found to be in essence Pythagoreanism. The whole conception of an eternal world revealed to the intellect but not to the senses is derived from Pythagoras, from him. But for him, Christians would not have thought of Christ as the Word. But for him, theologian would not have sought logical proofs of God and immortality. But in him, all this is still implicit. So there's a full page citation of 500 words, which I cannot do, of course, within the scope of this video. Okay. So, History of Western Philosophy is a book that is a must read. If you are reading just one book of Russell, this should be that one book. Yes, and not only Christianity, but Russell also found communism and Nazism essentially religions and equally dangerous. So Russell tells us that the greatest danger of our time comes from two new religions, communism and Nazism. To call these religions may perhaps be objectionable both to their friends and to their enemies, but in fact they have all the characteristics of religion. They advocate a way of life on the basis of irrational dogmas. They have a sacred book and history, a messiah and a priesthood. I do not see what more could be demanded to qualify a doctrine as a religion. I find myself in opposition to both, and I can no more accept either alternative than if I had lived during the great wars of religion. I could have been either a Protestant or a Catholic. I deplore the tendency to view them as the only alternative and to treat democracy as obsolete. If men think them the only alternative, they will become so. If men think otherwise, they will not, says Russell. So, the next book that I would recommend is The Basic Writings of Bertrand Russell. So, the basic writing of Russell is again divided into various chapters wherein the autobiographical ideas are divided. The Nobel Prize winning man of letters is the chapter 2. Philosopher of language, the philosopher of mathematics, the epistemologists, the metaphysician, the historian of philosophy, the psychologist, the moral philosopher, the philosopher of education, the philosopher of politics, the philosopher in the field of economics, the philosopher of history, the philosopher of culture, East and West, the philosopher of religion, the philosopher and expositor of science, and the analyst of international affairs. So the book in total is divided into 17 chapters, and I hope you will enjoy reading it. Next, I would like to, tell you about the less voluminous work of Russell. So again, one important quote that tells us about the sardonic humor of Russell is that a stupid man's report of what a clever man says can never be accurate, because he unconsciously translates what he hears into something only he can understand, says Russell in the History of Western Philosophy. One of the symptoms of approaching nervous breakdown is the belief that one's work is terribly important, says Russell in Conquest of Happiness. Conquest of Happiness, as I have already suggested in my previous videos long back, is one of the prototype of all the self-help book that you can imagine. So Conquest of Happiness was Russell's answer to the student of Peking University where he was teaching, and the students turned up to Russell for their spiritual crisis and problems. A happy life, says Russell in the same book, The Conquest of Happiness, a happy life must be to a great extent a quiet life. For it is only in an atmosphere of quiet that true joy can live. It is essential to happiness that our way of living should spring from our deep impulses and not from the accidental tastes and desire of those who happen to be our neighbor or even our relation. So, The Conquest of Happiness is one book that I strongly recommend. But please, don't get lured by the title. This is a difficult read, slightly difficult read, of course. So don't treat it as your usual self-help book. This is a deep exercise in philosophy. Then in the same Conquest of Happiness, Russell tells us there are nuggets of wisdom. So every line you can see is a nugget of wisdom. That if we are all given by magic the power to read each other's thought, what would happen? Again, I insist you pause this video for a while and think what will happen if everyone is given a power to read one's thought, everyone's thought. I suppose the first effect would be almost all friendship would be dissolved. The second effect, however, might be excellent, says Russell. For a world without any friends would be felt to be intolerable, and we should learn to like each other without needing a veil of illusion to conceal from ourselves that we do not think each other absolutely perfect, says Russell. The fact that an opinion has been widely held is no evidence whatever that it is not utterly absurd. Indeed, in view of the silliness of majority, a widely spread belief is more likely to be foolish than sensible, says Russell in Marriage and Moral. And then Russell says that even if 50 million people believe in a foolish idea, that still remains a foolish idea. So Marriage and Moral can be your starting point of reading Bertrand Russell, because the kind of topic that Russell engages with, I hope it will engage you. Marriage and Moral is a must read. Then Russell objects to belief in a deity, a very brilliant objection, that if we say that what will happen if a belief in deity, what's wrong if belief in a deity or a myth helps us live a comfortable life? Now here comes Russell's objection. Russell says that there is something feeble and little contemptible about a man who cannot face the perils of life without the help of a comfortable myth. Almost inevitably, some part of him is aware that they are myth and that he believes them only because they are comforting. But he dare not face his thought. Moreover, since he is aware, however dimly, that his opinions are not rational, he becomes furious when they are disputed, says Russell in Human Society in Ethics and Politics. So, Human Society in Ethics and Politics is one book that is to be read. So, don't get overwhelmed by the sheer volumes of book I am showing it to you. Read Russell for 5 years at a stretch and you will achieve whatever that you demand of reading. Now, you see, Russell was a champion of thought, and no wonder he says that men fear thought as they fear nothing else on earth, more than ruin, more even than death. Thought is subversive and revolutionary, destructive and terrible. Thought is merciless to privileged, established institutions and comfortable habits. Thought is archaic and lawless, indifferent to authority, careless of the well-tried wisdom of the ages. Thought looks into the pit of hell and is afraid. Thought is great and swift and free, the light of the world and the chief glory of man. So, reading Russell will, broaden your thought like anything. I would recommend also The Impact of Science on Society, a very thin book where Russell talks about the scientific methods, the limitation of science, and the prospect of industrial civilization, and what are the things that we can look forward to in science, and how science is quintessentially amoral. Please read it. A lot of Russell's writing, especially his unpopular essays and skeptical essays, are filled to the core what I call the intellectual history of mankind, which means if you have to understand the world as it is now and what were the causal forces that shaped the world, the intellectual forces that shaped the world, the history of ideas, the history of thoughts, I think Russell is to be read. So most of these essays, for example, Outline of an Intellectual Rubbish, A Free Man Worship, The Function of a Teacher, Ideas that have helped mankind, Ideas that have harmed mankind, all these are to be found in these two books. Please read. Apart from that, these days there has been a lot of clamor of 70-hour work week. Should we work for 70 hours? Should the younger generation work for 70 hours? Which I of course disagree, but it has been discussed by Russell in his book In Praise of Idleness, where he supports working for 4 hours a day. And he has written so cogently on this subject, considering the economic angle, that why working for 4 hours a day will not amount to any loss. And that Russell says that to be able to fill leisure intelligently is the last product of civilization, and at present very few people have reached this level. So Praise of Idleness is another exercise in self-help book, another exercise in reading the various nuggets of Russellian wisdom that you will immensely enjoy. So please read Praise of Idleness. Apart from that, a scientific outlook can be read if scientific reading interests you. And at last, whatever you are reading, whatever life work you are experiencing, if you don't have the capacity to endure boredom, then you are doomed. You must have the capacity to endure boredom. Says Russell, a generation that cannot endure boredom will be a generation of little men, of men unduly divorced from the slow process of nature, of men in whom every vital impulse slowly withers as though they were cut flowers in a vase, says Russell. So happy reading. Please enjoy Bertrand Russell. If you have still not liked, shared and subscribed my YouTube channel, Arguably the Reading Quest, please do that. Please spread the word. Thank you so much.